Breaking the System. The Descent of Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione was the epitome of success in his youth. A star student, he graduated as valedictorian, delivering a heartfelt speech that resonated with hope and determination. "The future lies ahead of us," he declared, his voice steady and full of conviction. "With perseverance and effort, we can change the world." His words earned him a standing ovation, and shortly after, he received an acceptance letter to a prestigious Ivy League university, a ticket to a bright and promising future. However, life took a cruel turn. Luigi began to suffer from chronic back pain caused by spondylolisthesis, a condition that would soon dominate every aspect of his existence. Seeking solace and a fresh start, he moved to Hawaii, a paradise where he hoped to reclaim his joy and vitality. Yet, the pain only grew worse. The activities he once loved, surfing, hiking, even simple daily tasks, became impossible. The symptoms escalated. Sleepless nights plagued by agony, numbness spreading through his legs, and unrelenting pain that left him drained and despondent. Luigi's isolation deepened, and the vibrant, ambitious young man who once inspired others seemed to disappear. One day, amidst the mounting despair, Luigi received a hospital bill with an astronomical figure. Bold red letters emblazoned across the top declared, "Claim denied." The message was a dagger to his hopes, a stark reminder that the system he had relied on had failed him. The crushing weight of helplessness began to shift into anger. Staring at the bill, his fists clenched, Luigi muttered to himself, "Something has to change. The beginning of the end." The battle with the system. Luigi's growing frustration turned into obsession as he began researching everything about the healthcare system. Late nights found him poring over articles, books, and case studies. Each story of denied claims and financial ruin deepened his disdain for the industry. The denial of his own treatment was not an isolated incident. He discovered that insurance companies routinely delayed, denied, and defended their decisions at the expense of patients. This realization struck a nerve. Luigi began keeping a journal, filling its pages with grievances, thoughts of reform, and scathing critiques of what he saw as a profit-driven machine. A breaking point. The pain in Luigi's back persisted, unrelenting. His attempts to seek alternative treatments only led to more bills and more denials. The financial strain, combined with his physical suffering, began to erode his mental stability. One entry in his journal read, "They don't care if we live or die. To them, we're numbers on a spreadsheet, expenses to be minimized. How did it come to this? How did we let them get this much power?" Another entry was more ominous. What would happen if one of them were to feel what we feel? Would they finally listen? Luigi's anger turned inward as he began withdrawing from friends and family. Calls and texts went unanswered. His social media accounts fell silent. To those who knew him, it was as if Luigi Mangione had vanished. The beginning of the end. Obsession takes root. Luigi Mangione's world had grown smaller with each passing day. Once a vibrant young man who spent his weekends hiking and painting landscapes, he now found himself trapped within the walls of his apartment, his passion and optimism eroded by unrelenting pain. The pain in his back became the focal point of his existence, forcing him to abandon nearly every activity he once cherished. What remained was a singular, burning resentment against the system that had failed him. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, Luigi would sit hunched over his laptop, surrounded by the soft glow of his screen. Search after search led him deeper into the labyrinth of the American healthcare system. Articles detailing outrageous insurance practices, testimonies from patients denied life-saving treatments, and exposés on corporate greed filled his browser tabs. He began to keep a notebook, its pages filling rapidly with scribbled notes, underlined statistics, and haunting questions. Why is healthcare a privilege, not a right? Who profits from our suffering? What happens when hope runs out? His journal became a mirror for his frustration, capturing the gradual shift from despair to anger and finally to obsession. One entry read, "I used to believe in the system, that it would protect us, but now I see its true face, profit above all else." Another, scribbled late at night, questioned, "How much suffering must we endure before someone takes notice?" As the days passed, his entries grew darker. "If they won't listen to our pain, perhaps they'll listen to our actions." Luigi's days blurred into nights as he devoured stories of others who, like him, had been left to fend for themselves. He saw patterns, deliberate delays in claim approvals, impenetrable bureaucratic red tape, and the omnipresent goal of maximizing profits at all costs. One article particularly struck him. a detailed report about United Healthcare's record profits juxtaposed against a lawsuit involving multiple patient deaths due to denied claims. The article quoted a grieving mother who had lost her son. They denied his treatment 3 times while claiming there was nothing more they could do. But it wasn't true. He could have been saved. The cold, calculated defense from the company's legal team, "We followed standard procedures," fueled Luigi's growing rage. The CEO's name, Brian Thompson, etched itself into Luigi's mind. The more he read, the more his resentment crystallized. It wasn't just about his denied claim anymore. Luigi began to see his struggle as a microcosm of a much larger injustice. The more he delved into the stories of others, the more he realized he was not alone in his suffering. To him, the denied treatments, the bureaucratic indifference, and the corporate greed were no longer isolated incidents but threads in a tapestry of systemic failure. His anger shifted focus, from his personal pain to the millions who shared it, and with it came a dangerous sense of responsibility to act. It was about a system he believed was built to exploit and discard the vulnerable. A vision of retribution. In his isolation, Luigi began to form an idea, a dangerous one. He wrote in his journal, "They thrive because we allow them to. They destroy lives without consequence. Perhaps it's time someone made them see what it feels like to lose everything." The words, scrawled hastily in ink, felt like a release. Yet, they also marked the beginning of something darker. What started as a cry for justice was slowly warping into a vision of retribution. Luigi's focus sharpened. His daily habits shifted dramatically as he became consumed by his obsession. Meals went uneaten, his once neat apartment grew cluttered with discarded papers and empty coffee cups, and his phone sat ignored for days. He spent hours hunched over his desk, poring over maps, corporate diagrams, and online forums, his every movement calculated and deliberate. He no longer sought answers, but instead looked for weaknesses. Company structures, security vulnerabilities, the daily routines of key figures. These became the subjects of his late-night searches. He no longer felt powerless. Instead, he felt a chilling clarity, a sense of purpose forged in the crucible of his pain and rage. For Luigi, this was no longer about survival. It was about making a statement, the beginning of the end, preparation for retribution. Luigi Mangione's resolve solidified in the weeks that followed. The physical agony and emotional turmoil, once overwhelming, began to transform into a singular, focused determination. His pain and anger, once aimless, found a chilling direction. Every sleepless night became an opportunity to refine his plan, his mind consumed by thoughts of what he deemed necessary. Building the tools, Luigi began acquiring the resources he needed, carefully and methodically. Initially, he hesitated, questioning the morality of his actions, but the weight of his suffering silenced those doubts. He purchased a 3D printer online, justifying the expense as a hobby to anyone who might inquire. Night after night, he meticulously printed the components for a firearm, a weapon untraceable by conventional means. He researched designs obsessively, ensuring every piece would fit seamlessly. He also acquired a silencer, each step of the process hidden under layers of anonymity. Luigi left no trace, using prepaid cards and public Wi-Fi to avoid detection. The precision with which he approached the task mirrored his previous academic brilliance, now twisted into something unrecognizable. The manifesto. While he worked, Luigi's journal evolved from scattered frustrations into a full-fledged manifesto, a channel for his anger and a roadmap for his vision of retribution. He titled it "The Cost of Greed." Its pages were filled with accusations against the healthcare industry and its leaders. In one passage, he wrote, "How many lives have they destroyed with their lies and denials? How many families have been torn apart, watching loved ones suffer because they couldn't afford the price of survival? The system is a cancer, and those who profit from it are its architects." Another entry was even more direct. "Justice cannot wait for reform. Justice must be taken," targeting the symbol. Among the names Luigi had encountered in his research, one stood out: Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare. Thompson's prominence and his association with record profits during a period of widespread claim denials made him, in Luigi's eyes, the embodiment of greed and systemic failure. To Luigi, Thompson was not just a person, but a symbol of everything wrong with the system. His face appeared in press releases celebrating record profits. His speeches spoke of growth while thousands of claims were denied under his leadership. Luigi began to track Thompson's movements. Public records and social media provided a wealth of information. Conference schedules, public appearances, and even candid posts from attendees gave Luigi everything he needed. Thompson's routine became predictable, a map Luigi could navigate with unnerving ease. The final step. On the bullets Luigi crafted, he engraved 3 words: deny, defend, depose. These words, chosen deliberately, reflected what Luigi saw as the core tactics of the insurance industry, a mantra of evasion that justified his planned retribution. Each word, to him, encapsulated the strategies he believed insurance companies used to evade responsibility. Holding the finished pieces in his hands, he felt a grim sense of purpose. By the end of the month, Luigi had everything he needed. His weapon was complete, his target identified, and his mind set. For him, this was no longer a crime. It was an act of justice in a world he believed had none. Closing in, the city's skyline loomed before Luigi Mangione as his bus pulled into the terminal. The chaos of New York City hummed around him, a stark contrast to the quiet turmoil brewing inside. For weeks, he had meticulously planned this journey, leaving nothing to chance. Now every step he took felt heavier, weighted by the enormity of what lay ahead. Luigi's first stop was a small hostel in Manhattan. He chose it for its anonymity, the steady churn of travelers making it easy for him to blend in. The room was sparse, a twin bed and a small desk illuminated by a single overhead light. Setting down his bag, Luigi surveyed his surroundings. He unpacked with care, his 3D printed weapon, the silencer, and the 3 engraved bullets, each item meticulously wrapped to avoid damage during transit. He laid them out on the desk, staring at them for a long moment. The engraved words deny, defend, depose seemed to pulse under the harsh light. For Luigi, these were not just words, they were a mission statement, a manifesto condensed into 3 succinct terms. His grip tightened around the cold steel of the weapon as he rehearsed the steps in his mind, ensuring no detail had been overlooked. Surveillance. Over the next few days, Luigi began observing his target. Brian Thompson's itinerary had been easy to obtain. A high-profile figure like Thompson often moved through the city with a predictable routine. The investor conference at the Hilton Hotel was well publicized, a gathering of the industry's elite. Dressed inconspicuously, Luigi spent hours blending into the bustling streets around the hotel. He noted every security guard, every entrance and exit, and the flow of foot traffic. The Hilton's grand lobby, with its shimmering chandeliers and polished marble floors, became a familiar sight. Luigi watched Thompson arrive each morning, accompanied by a small entourage. The man radiated confidence, his tailored suit and commanding presence starkly contrasting the anger simmering within Luigi. Each observation fueled Luigi's resolve. He noted the time Thompson arrived, the car he used, and the brief moments when security thinned as Thompson transitioned from vehicle to lobby. These details became etched in Luigi's mind, the blueprint for what was to come. The night before, on the eve of the planned action, Luigi returned to his hostel. He stared out of the small window, watching the city lights flicker against the darkened sky. His journal lay open on the desk, the pen trembling slightly in his hand as he wrote. Tomorrow, the world will know what justice looks like. They will see the cost of greed. He closed the journal and placed it neatly beside the weapon. Every detail was ready. He had rehearsed the timing, the escape routes, and even the potential contingencies. There was no room for error. Before lying down, Luigi retrieved his phone, flipping through photos of his younger self. In one, he was smiling broadly on his graduation day, surrounded by friends and family. He barely recognized the person in the picture. Turning off the phone, he lay back, staring at the ceiling, sleep evading him as the weight of his actions pressed down. The final morning. The air was crisp as Luigi stepped onto the streets of Manhattan the next morning. His heart pounded in rhythm with his footsteps, the city's noise muffled by the singular focus of his mission. He arrived at the Hilton an hour early, positioning himself discreetly across the street. The weapon was concealed beneath his jacket, the bullets already loaded. Time ticked by slowly, each passing minute tightening the coil of tension in his chest. Finally, he spotted Thompson's black SUV pulling up to the curb. Luigi's breath hitched as the moment arrived. He crossed the street with purpose, weaving through the crowd until he was mere steps behind his target. As Thompson exited the vehicle, Luigi's hand found the weapon beneath his coat. The world seemed to slow, every sound fading into a dull hum. Thompson turned slightly, his profile catching the morning light, unaware of the shadow looming behind him. Luigi's finger hovered over the trigger, his heart pounding as he prepared to cross the point of no return. The moment had come. Luigi Mangione's fingers gripped the weapon firmly beneath his coat as he closed the final distance to his target. His heart raced, each beat echoing the weight of his decision. For a fleeting moment, he questioned if this was the point of no return, but the thought dissolved as quickly as it appeared. The world around him seemed muted, the bustling streets, the blaring horns, even the morning chatter faded into an indistinct hum. His vision tunneled, focused solely on Brian Thompson. Thompson, oblivious to the danger, adjusted his tie and greeted an associate who had emerged from the Hilton lobby. The brief exchange gave Luigi a fraction of a second to recalibrate his approach. The crowd was dense, but Luigi moved with purpose, his steps synchronized with the rise and fall of his own heartbeat. With one swift motion, Luigi pulled the weapon from beneath his coat. The cold steel felt heavier than he anticipated, as if it bore the weight of every decision that had led him to this moment. He raised it, steadying his aim on the broad target of Thompson's back. His fingers slid onto the trigger. 3 shots. The first shot cracked through the air, its muted thud amplified in Luigi's ears as the crowd around him erupted into chaos. A woman nearby screamed, dropping her coffee, while others froze in stunned disbelief, their faces etched with terror. The bullet struck Thompson's lower back, causing him to lurch forward in shock and pain. Gasps erupted from the surrounding crowd as people froze, their morning routines shattered by the sudden violence. Luigi fired again, this time hitting Thompson squarely in the shoulder. The force of the second impact sent the man sprawling to the ground. The final shot was deliberate. Luigi stepped closer, ensuring precision as he aimed at Thompson's upper back. The third bullet silenced the CEO's feeble attempts to rise, leaving him motionless on the pavement. For a fleeting moment, there was silence, an unnatural stillness in the chaos of Manhattan. The escape. Reality snapped back like a rubber band. Screams and shouts pierced the air as bystanders scattered in all directions. A man nearby tried to shield his child, while others instinctively ducked behind parked cars. Some reached for their phones, the glow of screens adding to the surreal chaos. Luigi knew he had only seconds before the panic gave way to pursuit. He turned sharply, his movements practiced and precise. The weapon disappeared beneath his jacket as he slipped through the crowd, weaving between startled pedestrians. The bike stand he had scouted earlier was just ahead. He unlocked an e-bike with trembling hands and mounted it, pedaling furiously towards Central Park. The ride was a blur of motion and adrenaline. At one intersection, he nearly collided with a delivery truck, the driver's horn blaring in frustration. Luigi swerved sharply, his grip tightening on the handlebars as he pressed forward, his thoughts a tangle of calculation and urgency. He avoided the main paths, sticking to less crowded routes that led him deeper into the park. At a predetermined spot, Luigi abandoned the bike. He shrugged off his jacket and stuffed it, along with the weapon, into a backpack. The jacket had been chosen deliberately for its reversible design, and Luigi quickly flipped it to its neutral side before slinging the bag over his shoulder. From there, he merged seamlessly into the crowd of joggers and dog walkers, his pace unhurried and his expression calm. To anyone passing by, he was just another morning commuter enjoying the crisp air of Central Park. The aftermath. By the time Luigi reached Penn Station, news of the shooting had begun to spread. Overhead monitors displayed headlines, breaking, CEO of United Healthcare shot in brazen daylight attack. Luigi's eyes lingered on the screen for only a moment before he continued toward the ticket counter. He purchased a train ticket to Philadelphia, cash only, and took a seat in the farthest corner of the platform. His eyes darted around the station, scanning for any signs of pursuit, while his breathing slowed to an eerie calm. The faint hum of a distant announcement barely registered in his mind as he prepared for the next phase of his escape. The adrenaline had begun to subside, replaced by an eerie calm. Luigi replayed the events in his mind, every detail etched with precision. He felt no elation, no remorse, only the certainty that he had done what he believed was necessary. As the train pulled into the station, Luigi boarded quietly, blending into the anonymity of the bustling crowd. The city of New York receded into the distance, its towering skyline shrinking from view. For Luigi, there was no turning back now. The act was done, and the world would have to grapple with the consequences. Shockwaves across the nation. The news broke like a thunderclap, reverberating across the country. United Healthcare CEO assassinated in broad daylight. The headline dominated every screen, from 24-hour news networks to smartphone notifications. The accompanying footage, grainy but unmistakable, showed Brian Thompson collapsing onto the pavement while the crowd scattered in panic. Within minutes, the incident had become the sole focus of national conversation. In corporate boardrooms and government offices, the assassination sent shockwaves. United Healthcare released a brief, somber statement mourning the loss of their CEO, while politicians and industry leaders scrambled to condemn the act. Words like domestic terrorism and an attack on the fabric of our society filled press conferences. The public divide. While official statements decried the violence, social media erupted in a storm of opinions. Hashtags like #JusticeForLuigi and #EndInsuranceGreed trended within hours, alongside #ThompsonMurder and #HealthCareReformNow. Public sentiment fractured sharply. On one side were those who condemned Luigi's actions outright, calling them barbaric and unjustifiable. On the other, an alarming number of voices framed him as a vigilante hero. Luigi did what no one else had the courage to do, read one viral tweet. He stood up to a system that profits off our pain. Memes began circulating, juxtaposing Thompson's multi-million-dollar salary with stories of patients who had died after being denied coverage. Luigi's mugshot, released hours after his arrest in Pennsylvania, became an icon. To some, a symbol of rebellion. To others, a grim reminder of escalating violence. Law enforcement mobilizes. In New York, the NYPD launched a full-scale investigation, working alongside federal agencies to trace Luigi's movements leading up to the attack. Surveillance footage from the Hilton Hotel in Central Park painted a clear picture of his escape route, though authorities were left baffled by his precision and preparation. This wasn't an impulsive act, said Detective Angela Ramirez at a press briefing. This was calculated, methodical, and designed to send a message. The FBI's involvement escalated the case to a national level. Luigi's journal, recovered from his hostel room, provided chilling insight into his motives. Phrases like the cost of greed and justice must be taken became the center of heated debates about whether Luigi's actions were those of a criminal or a desperate man pushed too far. Families in mourning. As the investigation unfolded, two families grieved in vastly different ways. The Thompson family, Brian's wife and two children, became the focus of media attention. Photographs of their tear-streaked faces leaving a private funeral service were plastered across tabloids. The family's attorney issued a statement. This senseless act of violence has robbed us of a loving husband and father. We implore the public to reject the glorification of this tragedy. Meanwhile, Luigi's estranged family faced scrutiny of a different kind. Reporters descended on their modest suburban home, probing for any insight into Luigi's past. His mother, a quiet woman in her 60s, broke her silence only once. Luigi was a good boy. He just wanted to help people. I don't understand how it came to this. The nation reacts. As the first 48 hours passed, the event's ripple effects deepened. Protests erupted in major cities, some demanding sweeping healthcare reforms, others condemning Luigi's actions as terrorism. Vigils for Thompson were held in corporate hubs like New York and Minneapolis, while grassroots rallies advocating for healthcare justice took place on the steps of state capitals. The divide was stark and growing. For every candlelit vigil mourning Thompson's death, there was a banner demanding, "Healthcare is a human right." America found itself at a crossroads, with the lines between justice, desperation, and extremism growing increasingly blurred. Escalation and debate. As the days passed, the assassination of Brian Thompson became more than just a shocking act of violence. It became a national phenomenon. The media's incessant coverage fueled debates that spilled into workplaces, dinner tables, and online forums. Every detail of Luigi Mangione's life was dissected, from his Ivy League education to his battle with chronic pain and his ultimate descent into infamy. Political divisions. Politicians wasted no time in using the tragedy to further their agendas. On one side, lawmakers called for stronger measures to combat domestic terrorism and crack down on violent extremism. This act was not justice, Senator Martha Reynolds declared on the Senate floor. It was cold-blooded murder, and we must ensure that our laws deter such heinous acts. On the other side, progressive voices seized the moment to highlight the flaws in the American healthcare system. What drove Luigi Mangione to such desperation? Asked Congressman Daniel Lee during a press conference. This is the wake-up call we cannot ignore. Healthcare in this country is broken, and people are dying because of it. These opposing narratives deepen the divide, turning the tragedy into a flashpoint for one of the country's most contentious issues. The public's reaction. Public opinion grew more polarized by the day. Talk shows and podcasts hosted heated debates, with some panelists calling Luigi a symptom of a broken system and others branding him a dangerous extremist. Social media continued to serve as the battlefield for these ideological wars, with hashtags like #HealthcareHeroes and #LuigiTheTerrorist trending simultaneously. A surprising subset of supporters began to emerge, organizing online petitions and even fundraising efforts to support Luigi's legal defense. To them, Luigi was a martyr, a man pushed to the brink by an uncaring system. Conversely, others launched campaigns to honor Brian Thompson's legacy, portraying him as a visionary leader taken too soon. Media spotlight. The media frenzy surrounding Luigi's actions turned him into an unwitting cultural symbol. Documentaries were quickly greenlit, focusing on everything from his upbringing to the systemic failures that might have fueled his actions. One particularly provocative headline from a national magazine read, "Revolution or Revenge?" The complex case of Luigi Mangione. Cable news networks held marathon coverage, cycling between legal analysts, healthcare experts, and emotional interviews with both the Thompson and Mangione families. Each segment added fuel to the fire, ensuring that the story remained the country's primary focus. Legal preparations. Meanwhile, Luigi's legal team began crafting a defense that would surely capture the nation's attention. His lead attorney, Karen Fredman, was known for her sharp rhetoric and media savvy. "This case isn't just about Luigi Mangione," she declared at a press conference. "It's about the millions of Americans who have suffered under a system that values profit over people." Luigi's actions were extreme, yes, but they were born of desperation. And desperation is something every American can understand. The prosecution, led by New York District Attorney Samuel Klein, painted a starkly different picture. Klein's opening remarks to the press were blunt. "Make no mistake, Luigi Mangione is a murderer. Whatever grievances he had, they do not justify the cold-blooded killing of Brian Thompson. Justice must be served, and the rule of law upheld." Societal unrest. Outside the courtroom, protests continued to escalate. Healthcare reform activists marched in major cities, holding banners that read "Healthcare is a human right" and "End insurance greed." Counter-protests sprang up just as quickly, with demonstrators demanding accountability for what they viewed as an act of domestic terrorism. In Washington, D.C., a candlelight vigil for Thompson turned into a heated confrontation between the two sides. Police intervened to prevent violence, but the event highlighted the growing unrest. A nation on edge. The ripple effects of the attack extended far beyond healthcare. Employers began tightening security at corporate offices, while schools incorporated discussions of extremism and mental health into their curricula. Fear of further acts of violence loomed large, with law enforcement issuing advisories about potential copycat attacks. Amidst the chaos, one question echoed louder than the rest. How did it come to this? The ripple effect. The trial begins. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the first day of Luigi Mangione's trial. Spectators lined the benches, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and sympathy. Outside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Protesters on both sides of the issue waved signs and shouted slogans, their voices carrying into the stately halls where the proceedings were about to unfold. Opening statements. Karen Fredman, Luigi's lead defense attorney, rose with calculated poise. She addressed the jury with a voice that was both calm and impassioned. "Ladies and gentlemen, Luigi Mangione is not a monster. He is a man who, like many Americans, was crushed under the weight of a broken healthcare system. He sought justice, not chaos, and while his actions were extreme, they arose from a desperation that we must all confront." Fredman's words hung in the air, eliciting murmurs from the gallery. She painted Luigi as a tragic figure, a man driven to the brink by a system that prioritizes profit over human lives. The prosecution's opening statement was starkly different. District Attorney Samuel Klein leaned into the podium, his tone resolute. "This case is not about healthcare reform. It is about a man who made a deliberate choice to end another man's life in cold blood. Brian Thompson was a husband, a father, and a leader. Whatever grievances Luigi Mangione held, they do not justify murder. Justice demands accountability." Klein's words resonated with the gravity of the charge, reminding the jury that their role was to evaluate facts, not ideology. Key testimonies. The prosecution's first witnesses included law enforcement officers who meticulously reconstructed Luigi's actions leading up to the assassination. Surveillance footage from the Hilton Hotel in Central Park played on large monitors, showing Luigi's calculated movements. The jurors watched intently as the timeline of events unfolded with chilling precision. Next, the prosecution called Thompson's widow to the stand. Her tearful testimony painted a portrait of a loving husband and father taken too soon. Brian was more than a CEO, she said, her voice cracking. Asterisk, he cared deeply for his family and his employees. He didn't deserve this. The defense's cross-examination was brief, respectful, and careful not to antagonize the grieving widow. Fredman instead shifted focus to the systemic issues that had fueled Luigi's desperation. When it was the defense's turn, they called healthcare experts and former patients of United Healthcare to testify. These witnesses shared harrowing stories of denied claims and financial ruin, illustrating the very system Luigi sought to expose. One expert testified, the U.S. healthcare system incentivizes denial of care. For every claim denied, there's a profit margin. Luigi Mangione's case, while tragic, underscores a much larger issue. Luigi takes the stand. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Luigi himself took the stand. Dressed in a simple suit, his face pale but composed, he addressed the courtroom with a steady voice. I didn't want to become this, Luigi began, his eyes scanning the jurors. But every door I knocked on was closed. Every plea I made was ignored. I watched my life crumble, while people like Brian Thompson thrived on our suffering. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to understand why I felt I had no other choice. Fredman's direct examination guided Luigi through his story, highlighting the pain and hopelessness that had consumed him. The prosecution's cross-examination was harsh, aiming to dismantle his narrative and paint him as calculating and ruthless. You had options, didn't you? Klein pressed. Asterisk, you could have sought help, protested peacefully, or filed lawsuits. Instead, you chose violence. Luigi's response was quiet but firm. I chose to be heard. The nation watches. The trial was broadcast live, capturing the attention of millions. Families gathered around their televisions, while commentators dissected every word and gesture. The divide in public opinion grew sharper. Some saw Luigi's testimony as a poignant indictment of systemic failures. Others viewed it as self-serving rationalization for a heinous crime. The courthouse steps became a microcosm of the national divide. Protesters clashed daily, their chants blending into a cacophony of anger and frustration. Police presence increased, creating a tense atmosphere that mirrored the stakes inside the courtroom. A verdict looms. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides delivered impassioned closing arguments. Fredman implored the jury to consider the context of Luigi's actions, urging them to see him as a man broken by a system, not a cold-blooded killer. Klein, in contrast, called for justice for Brian Thompson and his family, reminding the jury that murder, no matter the motive, cannot be excused. The jury retired to deliberate, leaving the nation holding its collective breath. Outside the courthouse, the chants of protesters grew louder, echoing the tension of a country waiting for a verdict that would define not just a case, but a movement. Reckoning. The verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back into their seats, their expressions stoic and unreadable. Luigi Mangione sat at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze fixed on the foreperson. Months of public scrutiny, heated debates, and legal battles had culminated in this moment. The judge addressed the jury. Have you reached a verdict? The foreperson stood, a piece of paper trembling in their hand. We have, Your Honor. The tension in the room was palpable. Outside the courthouse, crowds of protesters, both supporters and detractors of Luigi, waited anxiously. The case had divided the nation, and this verdict would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Luigi Mangione, guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Luigi's shoulders sank slightly, but his expression remained calm. Karen Fredman placed a hand on his arm, whispering something inaudible, her face a mixture of disappointment and resolve. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Order in the court. The murmurs died down as the judge addressed Luigi directly. Mr. Mangione, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder. Sentencing will take place in 30 days. Public reaction. News of the verdict spread like wildfire. Within minutes, headlines blared across every major outlet. Luigi Mangione found guilty in high-profile assassination trial. Television networks ran non-stop coverage, replaying key moments from the trial alongside reactions from legal experts and public figures. The divide in public opinion only deepened. Supporters of Luigi viewed the verdict as further evidence of systemic failure, calling him a scapegoat for a broken healthcare system. Online forums buzzed with comments like, "They punished him for speaking the truth." Conversely, critics celebrated the outcome as a victory for justice. "No matter his reasons, murder cannot be justified," read one editorial in a prominent newspaper. Luigi's reflections. That evening, Luigi sat alone in his cell, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. The courtroom's chaos felt distant now, replaced by the sterile quiet of confinement. A journal lay open on the small desk beside his bed, its pages filled with his neatly written thoughts. "Today, they called me a murderer. Perhaps they are right, but I did not kill for myself. I killed for every person who has been ignored, denied, and discarded by a system that values profits over lives. Would I do it again? I don't know. But I know this, the world is watching now. And maybe, just maybe, they will finally see." Luigi put down his pen and leaned back against the cold cinderblock wall. His mind replayed the trial, the faces of the jurors, and the look in Brian Thompson's eyes during those final moments. Regret mingled with resolve, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions he couldn't fully unravel. A nation divided. Across the country, the trial's outcome continued to spark protests and debates. In Washington, lawmakers clashed over proposed healthcare reforms, with some citing Luigi's case as a catalyst for change. Grassroots movements gained momentum, their rallies drawing thousands of supporters demanding systemic overhauls. Meanwhile, vigils for Brian Thompson were held in cities nationwide. His family released a statement, "We are grateful for the justice served today. While nothing can bring Brian back, we hope this verdict provides some measure of closure." The opposing forces of grief and activism painted a portrait of a nation at a crossroads, grappling with questions of justice, morality, and the true cost of desperation. The next step. As Luigi awaited sentencing, his case became a touchstone for deeper societal discussions. Documentaries were announced, books were written, and debates raged on about whether Luigi Mangione was a villain or a martyr. For Luigi, the courtroom's verdict was just the beginning of a larger battle, one fought not with bullets, but with ideas and the hope for change. Reckoning. Sentencing day. The courtroom was as packed as it had been on the day of the verdict. Reporters lined the back row, their cameras and notepads ready to capture the final chapter of Luigi Mangione's trial. Protesters and supporters clashed outside, their chants and signs a cacophony of anger, hope, and frustration. Luigi entered the courtroom in shackles, escorted by 2 guards. His face was calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of exhaustion. Karen Fredman walked beside him, her expression unreadable but professional. The two exchanged brief words before Luigi took his seat. Judge Emerson's gavel struck the bench, silencing the murmurs in the gallery. "We are here today for the sentencing of Luigi Mangione, found guilty of first-degree murder. After reviewing the facts of the case, the court has reached its decision." The room fell silent. Luigi sat motionless, his hands resting on the table in front of him. The judge continued, her voice steady but solemn. "Mr. Mangione, while the court acknowledges the personal and systemic struggles that may have influenced your actions, the law is clear. You have taken a life, and for that, you must be held accountable. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Supporters of Luigi wept openly, while detractors nodded in approval. Luigi himself remained stoic, his expression unreadable as he absorbed the weight of the sentence. A farewell statement. Before being led away, Luigi was given the opportunity to address the court. He rose slowly, his chains clinking softly in the silence. Turning to face the room, he spoke with a steady voice. "I know what I did, and I know how the world sees me. I'm not here to justify my actions or ask for forgiveness. But I want you to understand this. My fight was never against one man. It was against a system that leaves people like me with no options, no hope. If my life in prison makes even one person's life better, then it will have been worth it. Thank you." His words hung in the air, a poignant echo that left the gallery in stunned silence. Luigi turned back toward the judge, nodded slightly, and was escorted out of the room. Public outcry. The sentencing reignited public debate. Demonstrations erupted in cities across the country, with crowds chanting justice for Luigi and holding banners that read, "Healthcare is a human right." Counter-protests followed, emphasizing the sanctity of the rule of law and condemning violence as a means of change. News networks dissected Luigi's statement, with analysts debating its impact. Some called it a martyr's farewell, while others dismissed it as manipulative rhetoric. The divide in public opinion mirrored the nation's ongoing struggle with healthcare and justice. Luigi in prison. In the weeks following his sentencing, Luigi was transferred to a maximum security prison. His notoriety preceded him. Fellow inmates and guards alike were aware of his case. Some viewed him with respect, others with suspicion. Luigi kept to himself, spending his days reading and writing. His journal became a lifeline, a place where he could process his thoughts and reflect on the movement he had inadvertently ignited. Letters began pouring in from across the country, some from supporters, others from those sharing their own stories of struggle with the healthcare system. One letter, from a single mother in Ohio, stood out to Luigi. "Mr. Mangione, I don't condone what you did, but I understand why you did it. My daughter was denied treatment for her leukemia until it was too late. If your actions can bring even a shred of change, then her death won't have been in vain. Thank you for speaking up for people like us." The ripple effect continues. Outside the prison walls, Luigi's story continued to inspire both outrage and activism. Grassroots organizations advocating for healthcare reform gained traction, using Luigi's case as a rallying cry. Politicians introduced new legislation aimed at curbing the power of insurance companies, though progress was slow and contentious. Documentaries and books about Luigi's life and trial began to surface, sparking renewed interest in his story. To some, he was a symbol of resistance, to others, a cautionary tale of misplaced rage. Either way, his impact was undeniable. A quiet resolve. In his cell, Luigi wrote one final entry in his journal for the year. Asterisk, the world outside moves on, but in here, time stands still. I don't know if what I did will ever lead to real change. But if even one person finds the courage to demand better, then this life won't have been wasted. He closed the journal, placed it on his small desk, and lay back on the cot. The distant hum of the prison echoed around him as he stared at the ceiling, his mind a mix of regret, hope, and quiet resolve. A fractured legacy. The story of Luigi Mangione was never meant to be simple. It began as an act of desperation, spiraled into violence, and left behind a fractured legacy, one that the world struggled to define. While some saw him as a tragic hero, others condemned him as a cold-blooded murderer. Yet, in the shadows of his actions, deeper questions about justice and morality lingered unanswered. Rusty's reflections. I've spent my life untangling the threads of tragedy, piecing together the stories that no one wants to hear. But Luigi Mangione's case? It's different. It's not just another crime. It's a mirror held up to a society that's breaking at the seams. When I first opened Luigi's journal, I expected the ramblings of a deranged man. What I found instead were the thoughts of someone pushed to the brink. His words weren't wild or incoherent. They were calculated, deliberate, and painfully honest. Yet, no matter how much I understood his despair, I couldn't shake one unshakable truth. Taking a life isn't justice. It's simply another way to perpetuate the cycle of pain. One night, during a forum in a packed community hall, I shared something that stuck with me. Luigi Mangione's story forces us to confront the cracks in our society. He was a man overwhelmed by despair, but violence is never the answer. What his actions highlight is the urgent need to address the systems that leave people feeling powerless. If we ignore that, then we're all complicit in letting this cycle continue. The room was silent when I finished. Not because they agreed or disagreed, but because the truth is always hard to hear. My words don't erase what happened. They don't bring Brian Thompson back to his family, or undo the pain left in the wake of Luigi's decisions. But they're an attempt to make sense of it all, to ensure that the world doesn't just move on without learning something. A nation divided. Across the country, the aftermath of Luigi's actions continued to ripple through communities. Protests erupted in major cities, some calling for systemic change in healthcare, while others demanded stricter laws against violence. The slogans painted on banners and chanted in the streets told the story of a divided nation. Healthcare for all, on one side, and justice for Brian Thompson, on the other. At a rally in Chicago, a young activist held up a sign that read, "Luigi's pain is our pain. Reform now." Her voice cracked with emotion as she addressed the crowd. This isn't just about one man. It's about all of us who are tired of being ignored, of losing loved ones to greed. Meanwhile, a counter-protester shouted, "You can't fix injustice with murder." The two groups clashed verbally, their arguments a reflection of the country's deepening divide. Television screens were filled with heated debates, with pundits analyzing every facet of the case. One evening, a young activist spoke passionately. Luigi's actions were extreme, but they stem from a truth we can't ignore. The healthcare system is broken. How many more lives have to be ruined before we take this seriously? A conservative commentator fired back. If we start justifying murder as a form of protest, we lose the very foundation of our society. There are other ways to create change. The nation's pulse seemed to beat to the rhythm of this conflict, with no resolution in sight. The system under fire. In Washington, Luigi's trial sparked a flurry of political activity. Congressional hearings delved into the practices of health insurance companies, exposing internal memos that revealed shocking priorities. Minimize payouts, maximize profits, read one line from a CEO's email. A patient advocate testified, holding back tears as she recounted her daughter's battle with leukemia. My little girl died because our claim was denied 3 times. 3 times. How many more families have to suffer like mine? The hearings fueled public outrage, leading to the introduction of several reform bills. Among them was the Patient First Act, designed to hold insurance companies accountable for unjust claim denials. While progress was slow, the pressure was undeniable. Grassroots organizations gained momentum, using Luigi's story as a rallying cry for change. Protest leaders began citing his journal, arguing that his words, though born from despair, echoed truths too long ignored. A quiet resolve. In his prison cell, Luigi lived a life far removed from the storm he had created. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but the letters never stopped. Some were from supporters who saw him as a martyr. Others were from grieving families who had lost loved ones to the system he had sought to challenge. One letter, from a father in Kansas, struck a chord. My wife died waiting for a claim to be approved. I'll never condone what you did, but I'll always understand why you did it. Luigi folded the letter carefully, placing it in a box alongside dozens of others. At night, he often stared at the ceiling, wondering if his actions had truly made a difference. One evening, his cellmate asked him, "Do you think they'll ever fix it? The system?" Luigi paused before answering, his voice steady but distant. "I don't know. But if they don't, everything I've done, all this pain, it will have been for nothing." The larger question. I keep coming back to this case, not because I want to, but because I have to. It's a reminder of how far we've let things fall apart. I think about Luigi's journal, his letters, and his quiet moments of reflection. But I also think about Brian Thompson's family, their grief, their pain, and the life that was stolen from them. Luigi's story is a tragedy, but the bigger tragedy would be doing nothing about the problems that pushed him to the edge. There's a lesson here for all of us, and it's one we can't afford to ignore. If we fail to act, then his pain, and the pain of so many others, will have been for nothing. And that's something I can't accept.